By 1982, the whole idea of having like a wide national release was still fairly, it wasn't even a decade old. Jaws had been, the star of the summer blockbuster movie, but we're still talking like 8 years later, basically. So that was kind of still sort of a fresh idea. But you saw that, horror movies, action movies, and sci-fi movies were the ones that could open really big from coast to coast because that was something that could travel anywhere. These were movies that you could really exploit anywhere, South, West Coast, New York, any place they would run. So Star Wars had really proven that. Spielberg had done it with Jaws, did it with Close Encounters, did it with Raiders, which wasn't quite, it was more fantasy action, but there was obviously a hunger for it, and it seemed like there was no way of stopping it.
I feel like 1982 is the year that our blockbuster movies grew up and really started delivering one after the other after the other. Also, you had great artists making these films. I mean, you had Steven Spielberg on E.T., Nicholas Meyer on Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. You had John Carpenter doing The Thing. You had Tobe Hooper on Poltergeist. I mean, these are people who were steeped in film history, in film grammar. They're given the budgets suddenly. They have the technology suddenly to realize their visions in a way that maybe you couldn't have a decade earlier.
Warrior. Thief. Gladiator.
May 1982, I mean, Memorial Day hasn't even hit yet, and you're already off to a flying start that summer. You've got Conan the Barbarian, which was like the first of the big USC grad movies. John Milius, of course. He had this enormous budget from Universal to play with, so he had this big epic dream project, this huge fantasy film that he could do.
Conan the Barbarian was a milestone film. It's something that thousands and thousands of comic book and pulp readers had been waiting for all of their lives.
They said you would come, a man of great strength.
Conan the Barbarian, of course, is famous because it really put Arnold Schwarzenegger on the map. I mean, of course, there was Pumping Iron and other stuff like that before it, but this is what made Arnold Schwarzenegger a star.
Of course, it was a very hard R rating, which I think was a big stumbling block at the time because this was sort of a boys' adventure type film, but it had lots of boobs and blood and, just really inappropriate behavior, so you couldn't really take the kids to go see it. And I think a lot of critics were confused because they didn't really know how to approach this very adult fantasy film.
He's evil, a sorcerer who can summon demons.
It's interesting to me that what that film is about is a cult. It's the hero's journey, but he's going up against, a crazy snake cult.
Now they will learn what is fear the night.
Yeah, so right, hot on the heels of Conan, you have, probably the greatest, guy sci-fi movie chase film ever made, which is The Road Warrior. I mean, that was an intense movie. It was a major adrenaline rush. And I think a lot of people had no clue it was a sequel because Mad Max the original was released by AIP. It was kind of a drive-in film. But even then, people didn't really quite know who Mel Gibson was unless you were really paying attention. He wasn't a superstar. He wasn't Mel Gibson from Lethal Weapon.
In the future, cities will become deserts.
And The Road Warrior was an extremely influential film. Think about all the films after The Road Warrior, all the really bad films, Warrior of the Wasteland, Striker, all the Battle Truck. The Road Warrior was so good because it took its roots from the past. It said, we're not just going to rip off this movie. This is sort of like a hero's journey in the West, and Max is like Shane or somebody like that. Somebody who sort of goes from one place to the other, and you don't want him to go. You even had the child, the feral kid, in The Road Warrior. So, the film was what it was a brilliant update of the Western.
You want to get out of here? You talk to me.
The Road Warrior, I think, set up the real roller coaster movie. I think when people say that a movie is a roller coaster ride, I think The Road Warrior is the one that really set the template for that. Because that is how it's designed. It's so perfectly paced, the way it just goes up and down, has that, humongous, 30-minute, ride at the very end of the movie.
The Road Warrior.
And that opened the same weekend as Annie, which was this huge budget family musical, completely bastardized the musical stage production that it was based on. They're barely even related at all.
It's the hard knock life for us.
And this same time you had Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, which is one of the greatest of the Steve Martin pure comedies, you know, the Carl Reiner ones that he made.
Steve Martin, Am, Rigby Reardon in Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid.
Will $200 be enough in advance, Mr. Reardon?
$200, I'd shoot my grandmother.
Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, it put Steve Martin in the film noir world, which is fascinating. They were actually taking footage from films like The Big Sleep or Double Indemnity, things like that, and having him talk to the characters in that film.
I'm on an important case. I need your help. These people we're dealing with are killers.
Oh, thanks for telling me.
Say something like, no, Ma, look, listen to me. No, Ma, look, listen to me.
And it was such a clever idea to take all of these clips from movies that were studio owned and then weave a new story around them. It was hilarious.
Now, when we fought, you had that eye of the tiger, man, the edge. And now you got to get it back. And the way to get it back is to go back to the beginning. You know what I mean?
And so the weekend after that, you've got, one of several overachieving sequels. Road Warrior, of course, was one of them. Then you have Rocky III, which was a much bigger film than Rocky II. Probably one of the best remembered out of the entire series. A lot of it has to do with the theme song, Eye of the Tiger.
Hey, why don't you tell all these nice folks why you've been ducking me?
This guy is a wrecking machine.
You know, you got a big mouth.
Why don't you come out and close your mouth, boy? Come on.
The first Rocky film in which he was not battling Apollo Creed, so they kind of made up this almost James Bondian Clubber Lang character that Mr. T played, and he played it to the hilt, as Mr. T is wont to play everything. And it was a lot of fun. It was a big popcorn film, did very good box office the whole summer long.
Bust you all.
Go for it.
Rocky III, an American tradition.
At the start of June, you have two of the biggest, I think, most fondly remembered films of that summer. The first being Poltergeist, which is probably the ultimate traumatic PG-rated film. If you were a horror-loving kid, that one was a major shock because if you saw the trailer, it was like, oh, it's a spooky ghost story about a little girl. She's like, oh, they're here. It's going to be a little, And then you see the movie, and it's the guy who's ripping his face off, and you got corpses popping out of the swimming pool, and you've got the, this like living, pulsating closet. I mean, that movie was intense.
Remember last night? Do you remember when you woke up and you said you were here? Well, who did you mean? Who's here?
TV people.
It came at the dawn of the yuppie age, and the yuppie mentality was, you've got to be upwardly mobile, you have to have your house, you have to have a good job, you have to do this, you have to take each step, you have to be a success. And the idea was you had to be upwardly mobile, and it didn't matter so much how you were upwardly mobile. And what we see in that film is the end result of sort of avaricious or corrupt business. Mr. Freeling's company, real estate company, they only moved the headstones, they didn't move the graves, which caused the dead to basically revolt and attack the Freelings. And I mean, that is pretty simply a metaphor for what happened in business when you're only looking out for yourself and you don't care about anybody else. There's going to be blowback, and that's what it is. It's like supernatural blowback in that film.
Its form is revealed.
What is it?
Its focus is clear.
I gotta say, seeing that opening weekend as a little kid in a theater full of little kids, that is something that I don't think will ever be replicated. I think that and Gremlins were the very few examples of movies that could actually you could feel sort of the nightmares like being born in their heads as they were watching this movie, all these little kids. Star Trek II, I think, was a big shock for people because when you think about it, that's a really ballsy film to sort of base a sequel, not to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, but you're doing a sequel to an episode of what was still kind of a cult TV show, and the first Star Trek film had been considered a dud. So here they had this lower budgeted film based on a story that only really diehard Trekkies remembered.
Beyond the darkness, beyond the human evolution, is Khan, a genetically superior tyrant.
It positioned Khan as sort of the ultimate nemesis, which I always find very funny, because before The Wrath of Khan, Space Seed was not an episode a lot of people talked about. That was the episode he first appeared in. It was one of 79 episodes. It wasn't like he was Kirk's main nemesis. Kirk fought 78, 79 villains in the series, and each week defeated each one of them. But after The Wrath of Khan, Khan became the nemesis.
There was a sense of naval adventure in that film that really kind of made it a roller coaster ride all the way through. The second and third act of that film were amazing.
Shield collapsing, Captain.
Star Trek II was the first film in the franchise that acknowledged the aging of the characters. Kirk was having a midlife crisis. He was aging. You know, they weren't afraid to show their age, and people loved it. And then, of course, they ripped the carpet out from under you by, killing one of your beloved characters in the end. Someone who you've been with, who you've watched on all these adventures since 1966.
The fact that it paid off so well and is still considered the very best out of that entire franchise is a pretty remarkable achievement, which I think Nicholas Meyer has to get a lot of credit for that, because it is such a beautiful script. It's so very literate and very humane and just smart. You don't have to know the origin of Khan at all.
At the end of the universe lies the beginning of vengeance. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Then in June, you have this huge grenade goes off in movie theaters around the country, which is E.T. the Extraterrestrial. It broke box office records. It was something that everyone went to go see, every age, all the way from like 5 years old to like 90. This was a movie that people kept going to over and over and over again.
And now, Steven Spielberg brings us E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
If you look at E.T., it's another film set in American suburbia, and we have there a broken family and a family that lacks a father. And this alien comes into the family and befriends Elliot, and I think, in a way, becomes a surrogate father.
I'm keeping him.
There was no escaping E.T. on television and Reese's Pieces commercials, books at the bookstore, toys at Lionel Play World or wherever you shopped. He was everywhere, man.
In a sense, I think it kind of screwed up the rest of that summer, at least as far as critics and the box office were concerned, because people were sort of fixated on E.T. They kept wanting to go back every weekend to go see E.T. And some of the films that came out afterwards, in a way, kind of got accidentally sabotaged.
Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
The black sheep sequel of the summer, which was Grease 2. And I think that people really had their knives out for it because it was Grease 2. They had the gall to not have Olivia Newton-John, not have John Travolta. Also the fact that you have this sort of inexperienced female director who's Patricia Birch, who was the choreographer on the original film. I think that in a way it kind of set the movie up to fail, because there was definitely a bit of a slant against American women directing movies. It wasn't always that obvious, but you could really feel it when you read the reviews. There was this kind of resentment. Like, why? Okay, why is she doing this movie? How dare she?
The plane, Firefox, the most devastating killing machine ever built.
Well, Firefox is a weird one because it is a movie, it's a Clint Eastwood film, but it's not something that his normal audience would go for. This was the guy who had been making money out of Every Which Way But Loose and the sequel, so people thought he was going to be sort of the more down-home kind of fun guy. And Firefox is a very cold film. I mean, it's an espionage film. It's actually very slow for the first hour and a half or so, but has this really cool plane. And it's fun to watch. And also the last half hour really delivers.
Gant, can you fly that plane?
Yeah, I can fly it. I'm the best there is.
It is one that kind of grows. If you go back and watch it as an adult, all of that espionage stuff at the beginning is pretty fascinating stuff.
So the following week, we have 3 movies that were all very heavily promoted. They were all big deals, and all of them basically suffered royally, but in very different ways.
Ridley Scott had already wowed the science fiction fandom, the genre community, with Alien in 1979. I mean, just an amazing, terrifying horror film. But in the summer of 1982, he came back with another visionary film, Blade Runner, starring Harrison Ford. And, of course, this was the story of Harrison Ford hunting down replicants, people who look like us but are not us.
There was an escape from the off-world colonies 2 weeks ago. 6 replicants, 3 male, 3 female.
Blade Runner is, I think, the greatest masterpiece of science fiction of the latter part of the 20th century. It's pretty much untoppable. It is, along with Alien. It is, the Ridley Scott movie against which all the other ones are measured.
And I find it really fascinating that this came out in the summer of 1982, the same summer as The Thing. And John Carpenter's The Thing is about how do we know somebody is human? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be a thing? And if you look at Blade Runner, in a way, it's meditating on the same subject. Is this thing that we've created, this replicant, this android, whatever you want to call it, is it human? Is it alive? Is it sentient?
I don't get it, Tyrell.
Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto.
So those are the two really huge masterpieces that summer that we now think of that were treated unfairly. They were both R-rated, even though they should have been targeted for younger kids. I mean, this is when Famous Monsters and Fangoria were being devoured by junior high schoolers. And Blade Runner was marketed to kids, basically. They marketed toys to it. I mean, they sold the little spinner models. But then it comes out with an R rating, and most of them can't go see it. And ditto for The Thing. It's, it's this really fun monster movie, and it's really scary, but again, the kids can't go.
From the director who brought you Smokey and the Bandit, Hooper, Cannonball Run, comes the ultimate spectacle.
The trailer for Megaforce was actually probably the biggest deal out of those three movies. I remember every single kid was like, Megaforce, 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 because of that line, the good guys always win. Every kid was quoting that before the movie even came out.
Megaforce was one of the crazy, unforgettable misfires of 1982. Okay, this was a film about an elite fighting organization with state-of-the-art vehicles, mostly like sort of motorcycles with lightning bolts painted on them. But, you'd think that soldiers going into battle might wear body armor and helmets and boots and things like that, but not the people of Megaforce. I mean, deeds, not words. That was their motto, right? They wore skin-tight gold spandex and headbands, like they escaped from an Olivia Newton-John video. So the look of it was bizarre.
I kind of love Megaforce, actually. I have a very soft spot for it, but it really, at the time, what they promised did not get delivered.
Aurora and Don Bluth Productions present a classic adventure in motion picture entertainment.
Since you didn't have Disney sort of owning the summer at the time, you had a little film called Secret of NIMH, which was made by a former Disney animator, Don Bluth, and this was his big attempt to sort of go up against Disney, which was something that I think ultimately wound up being his downfall in the end. It's probably the most tragic story in American animation, unfortunately.
It's a fantasy with wizards and villains and heroes.
I ain't scared of nothing. I'm not even afraid of the Great Owl. Will you hush up?
The movie is way more fantasy-oriented than the book is. Bluth introduces things like a magic amulet and all of this stuff. The book is much more sort of hard science, but I do like what he did with it. I think it's a very memorable film. It's the first time I remember a G-rated animated film where the characters actually say damn, I think twice, which might not sound like much, but at the time I remember a lot of kids were like, what? The rat said a bad word.
Discover the secret of NIMH and rediscover the child in us all.
Disney wasn't really going animation crazy, but they did weigh in with a film that you could consider animation. It wasn't hand-drawn at the time. This was a computer-animated film, and that's Tron.
The NCOM 511 computer, center of the most calculating intelligence on Earth. Within it, there exists an unknown civilization where man has never been.
Tron was another masterpiece of 1982. And in part because it picked up on what was happening in the culture with video games and arcade games. It operated in that milieu. And it realized at that point, well ahead of other films, that video games and movies can be really intimately connected.
Propelled into the digital world of the computer itself.
Oh man, this isn't happening. It only thinks it's happening.
And this was a film that Disney hyped up like crazy. They actually turned part of Disney World into a giant Tron experience before the film came out. So there was a lot of hype behind it, and when it came out, it was just a huge splat.
I saw it opening day and was blown away by it. Not the story, much like Blade Runner. It was kind of not as important to me as the visuals to that, but I got the visuals immediately, being part of the first video game generation.
Garp.
Garp.
Garp?
Yes, Garp.
Sounds like a fish.
Why you would make a big summer film out of a John Irving book, I'm not quite sure. It's a starring vehicle for Robin Williams, but everyone knew him from Mork and Mindy. And this is not Mork and Mindy by any stretch. This is not Wacky Robin Williams in any way. It's a very offbeat, very sad film. I mean, there's comedy in it.
Hey, Garth, you want to play? Yes. Not tonight. I have a headache. Every night you have a headache.
But World According to Garp is one of those movies that I think the medium was made for. That story was great as a book, but it was better as a film, in my opinion.
Haven't I seen you before?
You like football?
Oh, yeah, I used to watch it quite a bit.
Well, you might have seen me. I was a tight end with the Philadelphia Eagles.
And also, I think the subject matter is, I think, something way beyond what people were comfortable with at the time. I mean, John Lithgow's character alone, not something that mom and pop would go see in the theater in 1982. It's, you know, I think the whole movie just seemed kind of like weird, and they didn't quite know how to market it or what to do with it at the time. The trailer was just, you know, a cute little baby floating in the air. You had some pretty good adult fare coming out after that, in the sense that movies that all the grown-ups would go see. You had some R-rated dramas. You had Officer and a Gentleman, which actually went on to win multiple Academy Awards. I was kind of put off because, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but the original trailer was basically just Louis Gossett screaming for 2 minutes. There was no romance in it at all. But it turned out it was actually a really, you know, it was a good love story set in the world of the military.
Now, why would a slick little hustler like you want to sign up for this kind of abuse anyway?
I want to fly jets, sir.
My grandmama wants to fly jets.
Everybody saw that movie. Everybody heard that song, Love Lift Us Up, over and over and over on the radio. It really cemented Richard Gere as a romantic lead. So it was the big non-genre hit. If you had a girlfriend, you went and saw that multiple times over the summer.
I ain't gonna quit. You're out. Don't you do it. Don't. I got nowhere else to go. And now let's all get serious. Hey, you pervert! Get out of my...
Talk about one of the all-time great bait and switch maneuvers on an audience. Because if you look at the poster, it's all these teenagers, and they're like, you know, and it's like this hot, you know, soundtrack with all these artists like The Cars and Blondie and yada yada yada. And my God, that is not what it is at all. The soundtrack is amazing. But this was a remake. This was Canon Films was kind of really reestablishing itself under Golan and Globus, and so they remade their biggest Israeli hit, which was the very first Lemon Popsicle film. And they transposed the story almost identically to an American high school. But man, does it come out weird. But this film does not pull any punches. I mean, it is grim. There's some really fun stuff in it. I mean, there's goofiness, you know, like stuff with a hooker, and there's like the guys, you know, goofing around doing the measurement contest in the locker room and so on. So you think it's going to be this fun, rollicking teen film, like a pre-Porky's kind of thing, and then, man, in the second half, it just goes in a totally different direction. It is the first of 2 really big teen films that summer dealing with abortion, really frankly. Everyone, I think, who saw it fell in love with Diane Franklin. She's completely charming in the film, even though where her character winds up going is absolutely horrific. I think it is one of the all-time great gut punch endings. But then you have Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is, outside of John Hughes, probably the greatest 80s teen movie. It was based on Cameron Crowe's own experiences as a writer going undercover in a San Fernando Valley school.
Universal Pictures presents everything you always wanted to do in high school with everyone you always wanted to do it with.
Hey, bud. Let's party.
And unlike Grease 2, which was helmed by a director and I think suffered for it, this one did not. This was Amy Heckerling, and I think that she pulled this off so well that there was really no way that you could actually take issue with it, because of the way that she presented the sexual experiences of Jennifer Jason Leigh, who is more or less the main character in the film. There's a rawness and I think a trueness to the way that she is depicted in this film that I think a lot of people weren't quite ready for.
It says 100% guaranteed, you moron. Mister, if you don't shut up, I'm gonna kick 100% of your ass.
And of course, it seems to have set up a boom of that type of comedy going forward. Most of those that came after it, though, were missing an essential piece of the puzzle. The case of Fast Times at Ridgemont High, I think that piece was Cameron Crowe, who wrote the film.
That was my skull. I'm so wasted.
Weekends are a good time to escape to the woods. Unless the weekend begins with Friday the 13th.
And then we have Friday the 13th Part 3, and this was kind of an audacious idea when it came out, because this was Friday the 13th Part 3D. And that's like the main selling point on the poster. You have this knife and the words, the 3D sort of like poking out at you on the poster.
Jason, you can't fight him.
But this one was the first one where he started becoming more like Michael Myers from Halloween, where he's this driving force that you're running to get away from, that you were unable to kill, and when you do kill, he pops back up.
It's like a movie made for teenagers to go and sort of like dare each other to watch it.
Jason will come to you. Friday the 13th, Part 3 in 3D.
So many great films, so many we haven't even talked about. They just kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. More so than any year before, any year after. You know, you think in terms of a baby boom, was there an electrical outage 9 months before and then all of these babies get born? I would be very interested to kind of see what the genesis of that year really was.
I think the critics had the knives out for some films more than others, but almost every film that came out in that period, I think is revered or at least regarded with a lot of affection, justifiably, because it was kind of something in the air that all the monster kids had grown up and they were having fun with the camera, and that was infectious. I think that spread all over the world basically that summer.